There you go.
Yeah, and I've also been involved in many things in Bend, Oregon.
Yeah. Ditto.
Well, I'm even newer, just years in
Mm.
Bend. But David Klein, social worker in the area and, just going to be here. What else to say? Seems perfect.
We're in descending order here. I've been here 9 years. So, Kathy Austin. And part of the reason I'm here is I had been on a city council and was a mayor in a little town called Sebastopol in California.
Oh.
You know,
Yeah.
very quirky town. But I had been very involved with the current council and mentioning how I thought what made it possible for me to serve at the time I was a single mom and a sole practitioner architect was that the city gave me health insurance for myself and my children. And that, along with the big $200 a month, was enough to sustain me. And so I had made the recommendation to our current council that that might be something that would help get greater diversity on the council, is to provide health insurance. I know it's complicated here.
And we'll get it talked
But
about.
yeah, but that is in part, I think, why they've asked me to be on this committee.
Steven Seagal. I am not in descending order. I've lived here my whole life, 29 years. I
I
served
still
on.
got you.
I know you do. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that one. Couldn't be born any earlier, unfortunately. But I served on the city council for about 6 months as an interim counselor and excited to be here, serve my community and give some perspective on what council looked like in the last 2 years.
You guys can introduce yourselves too.
Hi, I'm Brooke Olson. I am a city attorney here at the city. And this is one of my first big projects, is this committee. It's been great working with you all so far.
I'm very much a city attorney. I've been here 15, 16 years, and I will tell you, when Stephen got on council and I realized he went to Bend High with my daughter, I was like, honestly a little mortifying. He's great, and I was so proud of him, but I was like, oh my God.
Sorry.
Yeah, so you know Zoe. They were friends.
Kelly Cannon Miller, ED for the Deschutes County Historical Society, but also Envision Bend board, that this was one of the topics that came up in the visioning process as a strategic goal. So keeping track of that. And let me tell you, it is so bizarre how this town, everybody clarifies how long they've been here. And they still think they're newcomers when they're 40 years or 45 years. But for the record, 25 years since we moved here. But I grew up south of here racing against Bend High and Mountain View High ski team from tiny little Lakeview.
From where?
Lakeview. Yeah. The Mountain View and Bend kids with Bachelor, they'd pull up to the Lakeview Warner Mountain with our little T-bar lift, and they were like, where did you bring us?
Yeah.
End of the world. And it kind of was. So anyway.
I'm Chris Cardwell. I've been married for 46 years.
Okay, you don't need my one. I've been married for 45,
We've
so.
been hanging around Bend for 40 years. We vacationed here for a number of years. Had a second home and have lived for 15 years and then lived here permanently for 5 years.
That sort of counts.
Yeah.
Heather Simmons, she, her pronouns, and my day job is with Pacific Source Health Plans. I also serve on the city's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee.
And how many years have you lived?
Almost 9.
Ah, decade almost. And we have,
Oh, hi, I'm Rob. I'm from Human Resources. I've been with the city for almost 13 years and moved here for this job. So a resident for almost 13 years as well. My wife's originally from Central Oregon though, so she's.
that counts.
Yeah.
All right. Good enough. Okay, so with that, everybody gotta get a copy of the agenda, I think it. Oh, right. Thank you. I have it written down here. So at the beginning of every meeting, for the record, we each need to declare any potential conflict that we might have, and that would constitute effectively if you plan on running for council or have a family member that plans on running for council. So
And it doesn't disqualify you, you just have to declare.
you
Put it on the
just have to put it on the record and declare so that the record shows that, you know, everybody's.
This next cycle.
And if you're planning on running. for
Yes, in the
council,
next
but you don't
cycle.
Want to tell us yet, that's okay too.
And I forget this is political, so most people might not wanna say their political plans, but it's just to protect you if you declare a potential conflict, because this could have a financial benefit or detriment to you or a family member is the
Right.
standard. And if you put it on the record, you can deliberate, you can do anything. Even if it's remote, that you might not say I'm absolutely running, but if that's even within the realm, it's just simple to say potential.
That would be it. And it's, what it does is it adds, I guess you would say, it adds fidelity to the process. And, you know, that's probably the best way to describe it, that it makes it so that it's not questioned by everybody out there. So, because
I mean,
remember,
Any one of us could potentially run for council at some
Yeah.
point, and we may not know that today, so that, I guess that's a potential conflict for any one of us.
I can definitively say.
Lou is like, absolutely not,
Definitively say I'm never running.
not happening.
Well, I will say that I don't know for sure, but I will say it out there that I potentially could run in 2024. So I will say that.
Thank you. Yeah, and that gets it on the record, and that's what.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate that. And I'll ask that same question at the beginning of every meeting.
As a reminder, I do work for Pacific Source Health Plans. I know this came up at our last meeting, so
Yeah,
to
that-
the extent
Yeah,
that
that's good to
this
say.
body makes any recommendations about which insurance carrier,
Thank you.
that could be a potential, but I think
Yeah,
unless we
thought of
don't
that.
do that, that there's really even a potential conflict.
Great, yeah, thank you for,
I'll mention that too. I work for Pacific Source as well.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Just put on the record.
yeah, that's one I hadn't thought of, but that's absolutely correct, yeah. So
I would hope we would not be making recommendations about insurance carriers. That's the city.
I don't think that's in our bailiwick, but
That was for the city's insurance and we have Pacific Source that, yeah, so that's good. Just put on the record.
okay. I think we're good on the procedural things there. Hopefully. Okay, so with that, then I'm going to move on to our PowerPoint presentation.
All right. I will be presenting this today. I'm figuring out how to share my screen.
And let me just interrupt a little bit here. Happy, we talked about this ahead of time. If you have questions during the process of the presentation, go ahead and ask the questions, except with respect to the issue of health benefits and that kind of thing, because we're actually planning on the next meeting having somebody from HR come in and specifically address that arena. So, and it's not that that's out of the discussion here, but it's just specifics regarding that. I'd appreciate it if you didn't, we didn't get lost in that right now.
Although the value of health insurance is a form of compensation that might influence the decision about how far to go with the cash compensation.
Right.
So glad you're here, Rob.
Pleasure.
All right. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over.
So today's meeting is focusing on the stipend component of this committee. Just a quick overview. We talked about this last time. This slide explains the current compensation of Ben counselors and mayor. As you see, it's about 20,000 annually for mayor and about 10,000 annually for counselors. That flows from a formula contained in the code. For council members, it's 10% of AMI based on the HUD calculation, and it's 20% for the mayor. And it's a 2-year adjustment cycle prescribed by the code.
I was gonna say, that's what the current status is, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, if you went online to the Ben code, that's what you would see.
And it would get adjusted automatically in the future every 2 years, whatever we decide.
If we decide something different, then that new amount or new formula will replace that.
You misunderstood my question. Assuming we do nothing and we say, we want to keep it just the way it is now. they would still get a review every 2 years and get adjusted to the current AMI at that
Correct.
time.
Correct.
Which is generally reflective of inflation.
Generally, if that's,
You might call it a cost of living increase, you might call it a cost of living increase or something like that every 2 years.
Is it a COLA or not? Is it? No.
No,
Mhm.
It's just a calculation,
It's just a
right?
calculation, it's the HUD area median income, and that's what we use.
Right.
And it's a chart, that we go to. I suppose every meeting could even go down. That was council's intent, honestly, we're the only city with this formula. But council thought, what if we went into a deep recession and everybody's income went
So
down?
we
that
could decide to abandon the formula?
Yeah, so this will be a code amendment and the code could strike that language and have a different way of calculating. And the responsibility that we've been given by the resolution is to effectively make a recommendation,
Yes.
whatever that looks like.
Then we would put that into. a
That would be,
amendment.
I
that
know
would
we're only on
go into a
slide
code
one.
amendment, yeah.
We're only on slide 1, but could you give us, when's the last time that it was adjusted? And how much?
2 years ago. So the current formula came into effect in
Mm-mm. The 19,540, when was the last time that was reviewed and adjusted and by how much?
Every 2 years, I
Well,
believe.
but
Yeah,
was that,
every
is that,
2
was that
years. I don't know what
6
it
months
was.
ago or 2 years ago? And
It was, my guess is January of 21. Or sorry, was it-
23. Would have been
It was
23.
January.
2 years.
It would have been
January
23.
23.
January 23,
I misspoke.
so just about almost a year ago. And how much did it go up or down?
I don't know that margin.
Nice to know.
From the material that we were given initially, the amount for the mayor
was
was,
1,066. per
yeah,
month.
and 12,792 a year. So it's gone up.
Yeah, so when the code was first adopted after the charter amendment, so this was 2018, and it didn't go into effect until after an intervening election, so we haven't gone back and looked at the exact days, those first councilors, so it was only certain positions. November 2020 is when it first took effect, so although the change was made in 2018, it wasn't until November 2020 for positions 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then 5, 6, and so the positions differ depending on when you were elected, but as Kathy just said, somebody who can do the quick math, the first time was, it actually says in the code what it was, 1,066 for the mayor and 533 for the council members.
Mhm.
So I think
10%.
2 years it's only gone up.
It's 10% of the AMI, not 10% of whatever was made the last cycle, though.
Exactly, so that was, shall be paid a stipend of 10% of AMI based on the HUD calculation for fiscal year 2017.
Do we have that
So
HUD calculation?
64,000 for 2017, the rounded AMI for Ben Redmond was 64,000. Based on this number, council members shall be paid what I just read you,
How much was the council member pay?
533
What is that a year? 533?
times 12.
It was 6,396.
Thank you.
It written it down.
Is it there somewhere?
So it's whatever the
Or you just
AMI
leave
is.
So I have
10%
written that,
calculation.
whatever, the stipend will be adjusted automatically every 2 years, beginning January 2021. After council members take office based on any revision up or down, that's what I was saying earlier, to the AMI as calculated and published by HUD. I can tell you, I drafted this language and how we even described the AMI took a lot of my talking to, at the time, she's not here anymore, about our economic development. It was super confusing, like, do we use the Ben Redmond MSA AMI? I had drafted it one way and then she came in and said, no, that because we use the AMI for affordable housing.
Mhm.
So that's why I worked with the economic development director and she also did affordable housing. Like, how do we calculate and what words do I put in and what chart do we use was not simple.
Well,
So
the reason
this
why-
language is what we came up with based on her recommendation because it was her area. This was Carolyn Egan. It was her area of expertise.
So between then and now, the counselors have gotten a $3,000 raise.
That must have been when so 2 years after 2021, as Brooke said, I think we've done it once. So that would have been the increase in AMI.
That's a 50% raise.
Yeah, AMI must have gone up, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, we could look.
Well, sure, AMI is probably gonna go up. It's inflation. It's gonna go up every year.
Not necessarily.
Many years. Some smaller, some bigger, but almost never goes down.
Yeah, I think.
But a $3,000 raise on a $6,000 base is a pretty generous raise.
But I think the setting back the numbers, the question for you all is if you like the philosophy of tying counselor pay to AMI as opposed to a flat rate. Other cities do a more traditional, here's a number and adjusted either by CPI or COLAs.
Right.
That would be a more
Right.
traditional,
Right.
that I think that we were coming out of a recession. This was just council's view at the time and the committee's view at the time of how they thought counselors should be paid. I think, you know, we could go through how other cities do it.
I was
but
gonna
that's
say,
a-
yeah, maybe what we
yeah.
need to do is go ahead and look and see what some of the other approaches
The
are.
other thing about AMI that's a little dangerous is when the auto workers get a 40% raise and the nurses get a 20% raise, you might see a big spike in AMI next year. I mean.
Yeah.
But cost of living wouldn't necessarily go up by those kinds of numbers.
I think for me, again, wanting to go through this information and so you can see a wide variety of. What's
Different
occurring, but
approaches, yeah.
For me, how I'm kind of thinking about this is how mayor and councilor duties have shifted over time and what is being demanded of them. And what they're being compensated. So I think it needs to be more in line with that.
Or how hard the mayor worked. Which also has varied considerably.
Okay, let's go ahead and let's finish going through that's okay. Let's go through the PowerPoint and that'll help, I think, with some of the.
In addition to the stipend that we just talked about, counselors are reimbursed consistent with the policy for city employees. So that means that if they incur any out-of-pocket expense related to their job duties, then they submit a reimbursement request and they're issued a check for that amount. The policy does limit that reimbursement. If you need to be reimbursed for a meal, it can't exceed the IRS amount. And lodging has to be reasonable and personal vehicle use is at the IRS rate. So that's just another pool that counselors do have access to if necessary. As far as how that reimbursement process works, when a counselor incurs an out-of-pocket expense, they submit their request and the city processes it and categorizes it in line with a specific category in the council budget. So the council 2023 to 2025 biennial budget has lots of different categories. And the categories that you see here are those most subject to reimbursement requests. These include supplies and materials. That's mainly office supplies. If a counselor wants to buy a certain kind of ballpoint pen that they really like, that's reimbursable through that office supplies category. But big things like printers and laptops, those are provided separately from this. It's not a thing that they go and buy themselves. Counselor costs is a miscellaneous budget category that's primarily used to comp meals incurred out doing city business. And lastly, professional development and training is a bigger pool used for travel and training expenses, whether it's a League of Oregon Cities conference or any type of city training like that. Everything from airfare to lodging to conference fees is all covered there.
And the amounts that are reflected there, that is in regard to what specifically?
Those are the budgeted amounts in the 2020.
In full, in the budget in full.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
every counselor gets $22,000 for.
Good question.
Yeah,
No,
that's what I was trying to clarify, yeah.
Sorry, that's for all seven.
That's the total.
All seven members.
The
For,
others are individually?
no, that's,
Oh, they're all for all seven.
They're all
those are for
total.
everybody.
Okay, so it's all peanuts.
Yeah,
So this is the budgeted amount, not the actual.
correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's not
that's
that
the
every
budget.
person like is maxing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that all make sense?
How does the actual compare to the budget?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, the actualization, I'm not sure on that.
Probably have to look at the last biennium.
And with professional development training, that's something that is approved in advance. They can't just pick something and say, hey, I went, did this, and here's all my,
Yeah, they really
Expenses.
mostly go to the LOC, the League of Oregon Cities.
And that includes the mayor too,
Yes, that
includes the mayor too.
The mayor has had some things paid for, without city. having
Like
to
a
pay
conference
for
of
it.
mayors meeting or something like that
Exactly,
was
she's had some
important.
things paid
Oh,
for.
yeah.
They're not big, but
So next we'll move on to the actual data that I've already circulated to you all. I prepared data from 14 Oregon cities, all of which are in the chart before you. And as you've already seen and as you see here, there's a pretty big range
yeah.
of stipends, of formulas that different cities in Oregon use. So I'm not gonna read through every box here, because you have.
Bless you. Bless you.
Because you have it.
Bless you.
But this is the data-driven approach that we're using pursuant to this resolution. So this is
But
really.
was this data actually used last time?
Yeah.
I mean,
we had. data
was
from
that the basis for coming up with the 20%, 10%?
Partly, it was also that the charter had $200 a month, so anything more than that was a big leap. So I think probably that committee, which was made up of former councilors, was probably more conservative in their view, going from the voters giving over control in the charter to the council doing it by ordinance. So I think it was probably more cautious approach than needs to be taken into the future.
Yeah.
But yes, we had a slide when we had the same LOC.
Yeah.
Maybe not as detailed as this, but the same kind of approach.
So do you have any sense of why why do the extremes exist? Why is Gresham paying $66,000 to their mayor and Tickett's paying $57,000 and Hillsborough's paying $40,000? And there's 3 or 4 that stand out and they skew your averages and your percentiles dramatically.
Right.
Do we know why? I mean, are those full-time jobs? Is there a difference in the structure that causes those numbers to be so high? I mean, Gresham's the same size as Bend. They pay their mayor $66,000 a year.
I wonder if it's a difference in roles between the different organizations.
Is it a strong mayor structure that with a
No.
full-time job and?
None of these cities have a strong mayor structure.
Oh,
Beaverton used to, and they recently transitioned to a council manager form. So I think that, I know that explains their higher stipend paid to their mayor, because
It's historical.
it's a historical or inheritance that they
Hard
have.
to take it away.
Yeah, and that, and that Beaverton's mayor comp package was redone upon transition, but they still retained that more generous compensation due to that history. So I
So
think
they're not
Beaverton's the
full-time
only
jobs.
outlier in that way,
So
but
they're not
everybody else
same structure.
is city manager led. Like that.
One explanation might be, and we had more detail, and I actually asked Brooke to take out, it was just such a big chart, it was hard to follow, but at one point she had, where is compensation set? So probably there might be some explanation in whether it's set by charter, by the voters, by resolution, or by ordinance. And honestly, therein lies politics and your sense of what the community, so if it's by charter, the chances of asking the voters for more reimbursement for counselors may be more difficult depending on the political year. If it's, so that might have been useful to see. It just was a lot of information, but there was a variety of mechanisms for how compensation is set throughout Oregon. There's not one method only.
Another thing you might look at is the revenue base of the community. So Beaverton's a very tax-rich community.
Yeah, this is a
Yeah.
general fund expenditure.
Yeah,
So this
so-
wouldn't come from rates or.
In other words, Beaverton, well, stated differently, Beaver can afford to pay their mayor $100,000 a year. We couldn't.
Are we limited to Oregon? In terms of comparisons?
I mean, in terms of council, I don't even.
Oh, it was just a discussion with Tiana, who didn't really want us to go outside of Oregon. Maybe even though it's not employees, she just. No, but I think council tends to find it more relevant to look within Oregon for something.
Yeah,
like
I
this.
think it could get to be problematic if we go outside the Oregon boundaries and I understand where you're
If
sort
we
of coming
said
from.
we really want to align more closely with the market, and we want to compare with other organizations that have really comparable kinds of roles and that sort of thing. We'd probably want to expand this group. You know, it really gets down to kind of our philosophy and how that applies to all this data, it seems to me.
Yeah,
I mean, Oregon makes a lot of sense to, I mean, I understand.
It gets tricky because when we're asked to go look at other states, especially for something that might be in statute or even a constitution, it's a lot of digging for us to make sure that we're not just, oh, let's look at Flagstaff. Well, they might have a completely different statutory, a different form of government. So we won't just give you the numbers.
Yeah.
We have to do a lot of research on, so what is,
Yeah.
and it becomes a very big project
Yeah.
before we give you anything
That seems
beyond the
unnecessary.
number.
Yeah, there's a slide
agree.
that will talk about employment compensation, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, how that works.
Oh, okay.
Dusty memory. Well, when we went to elected mayor, there was some discussion about that it was a half-time job. Was that? No,
No,
no. So the,
No, and the
No.
charter actually has the mayor to be the same as any other counselor.
right.
I mean, they,
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah, because another thing to look at is some cities have very significant spreads between the mayor's compensation and the city council's compensation.
Like
Others
Beaverton.
much narrower.
yeah,
yeah, let me get into that. In the next couple slides, I address some city policy considerations and how they award their stipends, so hopefully that will
Help
add some
clarify a
info
little
to
bit.
this. So this is just a chart
That's a good,
comparing Ben with everybody else who does compensate, as noted at the bottom, some don't. So
amazing that Salem doesn't. That still just amazes me.
Yeah.
That's like, or Medford.
So it's
Good
in.
Lord.
it's
Yeah,
in-
yeah.
It's an increasing order from Forest Grove being the least to Beaverton at the highest for mayor and kind of scattered for counselors. And as you see, we're in the bottom half.
and interesting that list in the way it graduates has nothing to do with the size of the city.
No,
no.
Mm-mm.
One would assume the complexity of the job goes up with the size of the city.
You know, not necessarily. In fact, the smaller the city you are on, everybody knows who you are. Everybody stops you constantly. I never could go to the grocery store without somebody stopping me and telling me what they thought. And they expect you to go to every single home when you're campaigning. I mean, and we were there past midnight every meeting. So no, I wouldn't say
Oh,
that the
interesting.
smaller the city, it's less.
Okay.
Also, the economic value that each of those cities brings to the state in Oregon is different, right? So Beaverton has a great economic value to our state, while Forest Grove actually really does too, but their annual mayor does not make that much. So it's a little interesting to see that disparity.
yeah.
I think also the I don't know if it's demographics or location, like a suburban city is different, has different demands on it than a rural city.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, and
It-
that's a good observation because a lot of these higher figures are in the metro area, right?
Mhm.
So maybe the cost of living is higher there.
Do you have a
Good
sense
assumption.
in Bend about the difference in the time commitment between a counselor and the mayor?
We talked about that a little
Yeah,
bit last.
The last two mayors have spent a probably significant amount of time compared to prior mayors, but
I know about that.
but I would say, you know, like when Casey was mayor, he ran a water utility and he simply didn't, and he was I thought, a really effective mayor, but he didn't have as much time, so.
And Jim just didn't spend as much
And he
time.
didn't spend as much time. Our current mayor spends quite a bit of time on all levels, local, state, you know, pretty engaged.
And our current mayor had to put a pause on our own career,
Yeah.
is my
And a
understanding.
young child.
So I don't think they're the only one that has to do that to manage.
Well, I can tell you from my own experience serving on council just a year and a half ago that you take a lot of time out of your own schedule. I work as a victim advocate currently with the Deschutes County DA's office, and there's many hours a week, I'd say 10 to 15 hours where I had to take off my own day job to come to council and come subcommittees that I was a part of, as well as just being out there listening to constituents that really need to be heard, especially marginalized communities and all that stuff. So yeah, it does take time, especially if you're working a 9 to 5. Which is most of the time when you're interacting with people and when you have council meetings as well. So you're really restricting who can run and who cannot run depending on what you're paying them, right?
Brooke, I'm sorry to be disruptive. I have another. I think we're wrestling with two goals. One is what's fair compensation for our public officials. The other is how can we provide better access to historically marginalized communities to participate in our government. And so the comparable data doesn't really answer the second question at all, like has nothing to do with the second question, right? In other words, because of course, the more money it was, the more likely it would be that we'd be able to help, you know, so.
I don't think we're gonna be able to answer the latter question through this.
Yeah. It's not
But I
what
think
thought.
there may be a mechanism that we could talk about, that we could address some of that, and just kind of jumping ahead. One thought that I had in looking at this, because I thought a lot about that issue, how do we build that in here? With the benefits, and I know we're not going to talk about the benefits right now, but just briefly, just to throw it out. I had a thought that maybe we ought to have a separate category that's an allowance. And just to give you a little bit of a context for that, most of my background is in executive compensation work. And we used to get involved in perks as part of the package, just one element of it. And we ran into, well, how much are we going to, you know, spend on a car for somebody, and how much are we going to provide in this and that? And boards really often felt that they wanted to cap that total expense. They wanted to understand what the total expense was for a car, for supplemental medical, for, you know, whatever else. And so we came up with a concept that we called exec flex. And it was giving them an allowance, and they could pick whatever they wanted. If they wanted a car, they could use it for a car. They could, you know, do something else. I wonder if a concept like that might work here, where you have an allowance that's equal to the amount that would be paid for medical benefits. And they could pick medical benefits and spend their allowance on that. Or they could have an allowance that they could use for providing childcare for, you know, whatever isn't covered on this that might be a blockage for somebody to come in here, but that might be a way to handle that. And it's just a thought.
I don't remember
But,
I don't remember whether I'd hired Steve to make that recommendation to me, but I did that with my firm. And it works really well, because like if your wife has health insurance and you're a guy and you're working for me, you don't need health insurance, right? But you can take the money and buy a fancy car, you know, or something else, you know? And so, and vice versa, a single mom might have very different needs than
right.
a married couple where.
Well, why don't we go ahead and what's that?
That's a benefits discussion.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think we'd like to
Yeah,
talk
a
about
bigger, but
what the research that
Oh.
HR has done on the options
And the cost.
and the
Yeah.
cost before we.
Right,
and the
yeah.
cost to the
Yeah.
city before we dive into that discussion. That'll be the next meeting.
The last meeting, somebody expressed interest in learning about the policy considerations that cities thought about when they established their stipends. So the following cities that I'm about to talk about all had accessible types of information about their policy considerations in their records. Some didn't. So I found all the policy info that I could, and I'm about to share it with you here. So first off, Gresham, before 2015, they didn't have any compensation for their council. In 2015, a ballot measure was approved by the voters establishing their current formula, which is that formulaic 45% of commissioner and sheriff. And in that ballot measure, the city's policy bases included establishing some safeguards and sidelines on the maximum compensation. They figured using a formulaic approach establishes safeguards, as well as putting the control in the hands of the city's finance committee. So that was a limiting approach that they took. They also had the general goal of broadening the pool of candidates and attracting more qualified, more diverse people. And lastly, they wanted to recognize the time commitment and all around accessibility that counselors have these days. Hillsborough's current stipends were established in a 2022 resolution. And the resolution explains their thought process. They acknowledge the city's history of stipend increases. They compared with other Oregon cities, and similarly to Gresham, they wanted to attract a diverse and qualified set of candidates. They recognize the time demands placed on counselors, especially the mayor, which is why they pay their mayor a bit more. They recognized the time commitment and out of pocket cost events that counselors face. And I think importantly, they consider the city's budget and the current fiscal climate. In Wilsonville, the current rates were established in a 2020 resolution. They kind of separated the mayor's considerations from the counselors. They recognized the amount of time spent by the mayor in their position. And for counselors, they simply wanted to compensate them for their out-of-pocket costs and travel and time spent in meetings. And this quote at the bottom is meaningful. The council is both mindful of the city's budget, time required to serve as an elected official, and a desire to attract a diverse elected officials in the future. So that was stated in the resolution.
It's a nice statement.
Quite eloquently, I think.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever followed up with this as far as what the outcomes of these increases are? Has it created an increase in candidates?
Do they achieve those goals?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, the sense that I've gotten from the other cities that I've spoken with is that it's been noticeable in a small way. I've heard comments about more women being involved as elected officials than in the past. But I don't think there's been anything earth-shattering yet in terms of getting a wildly more diverse group of people. It's been slow on the uptake, but still noticeable in general.
Well, and most of the changes that you pointing out here have taken place within the last decade.
Yeah,
I mean,
fairly
5 to
recent.
10 years. Yeah, fairly
Maybe
recent.
a little time to take it.
And what
Yeah.
data is out there? I haven't seen anything from League of Oregon Cities. But just a few years ago, we were working with a group that wanted us to do a survey just of our committees and commissions on what are the demographics. And sometimes, you know, the lawyers will have some concerns on what it has to be voluntary to get. But we just, so
information,
bad,
yeah.
this was very recent that we even knew, other than somebody like counting up and looking at pictures. So I don't know statewide if there's been, I haven't seen anything. It would be a great project for LOC to actually help us.
Mhm.
That would
Look at
be.
the last 5 to 10 years,
Bet.
Oregon wide, but I haven't seen that.
Could you remind us of the approval process? We recommend to who?
This
This,
city council.
and the council approves.
So what will happen,
So they have to
right
approve
now,
their
you're
own-
on the schedule in the middle of March, that might move to March 6th. So the work should be done by then. It will be a recommendation to council. The first thing is we would likely do a work session where we would be there, and then potentially, hopefully the chair and maybe one more of you to present the recommendation. And then assuming council agrees with the recommendation, that then becomes a code amendment. And for a code amendment, it's an ordinance and there's 2 readings and it's effective 30 days after, but
And they could conceivably go out for public comment as well if they wanted to.
I mean, it's a municipal code. So for all municipal codes, we usually, before it's adopted, we move the public comment to right before. But honestly, because of the way the charter and the code read, that council compensation is set by ordinance based on the recommendation of an independent advisory committee. That's you. So I don't really think council would want a whole bunch of testimony from the public. They want to hear from them, but to change the independent recommendation after all the work you've done.
Yeah,
Often we have committees and
Yes, sir.
council could just ignore the entire committee, but this one's a little unique where I think council would have to have a good reason to not listen to the recommendation of the
Recommendation, yeah.
independent advisory committee. After
yeah, it
you've
has a
done
little
this
different
work.
status than,
It's a little bit,
Yeah.
a
It's
little
a
different than other committee decisions.
major can of worms
Yeah.
to open it up.
Yeah, I mean, they'll
Right.
certainly listen to the public and
Yeah.
people are free to testify, but there won't be another group formed or there, it would be hard for council to not listen to this recommendation.
But it also doesn't, they're not voting in their own pay raise. There's the other
Exactly.
thing. It had to be the next
It will be a
election.
the next
code
election,
change.
right?
But looking at it from my professional lens, this is going to be perceived as the council voting for its own raise.
well,
That's the perception that will be.
Yeah, and we'll say over and over, there has to be
I
an
know, but we
intervening
won't.
election. Yeah,
yeah.
We can say it all.
How always
we how
is
it
it,
public,
yep.
so I think people are gonna think.
Else is gonna do it,
But
yeah,
it's,
No.
exactly.
Can only
How
do so
else
much.
to do it?
it's messy, but there's,
Well, and you keep
Mm.
leaning.
less
on-
less messy than it could be.
that-
yeah, right.
that phrase-
Less messy
that
than it
phrase
could
you put
be.
up there is
Yeah.
really a very useful phrase. That
Yep.
one, yeah, I mean, we should write that down. Because I think, when in making the announcement, I mean, this is what we want to say, something very much along those lines.
Yes,
Fiscally responsible, responsible and respectful of the time and effort people put in,
Commitment,
and
yeah.
also a commitment to diversity.
And, and,
That's perfect.
and this committee's findings will be written, and that will be a good place to
Yeah.
make findings.
Does everybody
like that.
agree with me? Does everybody like that? I really think that's
Yeah.
that's right on the money.
I think we need to, I think it's right on the money. I think we need to revisit that as we go through this, because I think in terms of communicating this, if we communicate just numbers, that's oftentimes a very difficult communication process. If you communicate it in the context of what we're trying to really accomplish here, it's a lot easier to, to explain and understand and accept and.
I mean, the truth is probably most community members in Bend don't know what counselors are currently
Yeah.
paid. Right?
Is that true?
So.
I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say.
They
I
don't know how
personally think
government
so.
works. They don't know how their tax works. They don't know how the city is financed. They know nothing.
They don't even know what a city councilor
Bulletin
is.
just published all your salaries. So.
wonderful, wonderful.
You'd make great DA.
The
So-
media will be interested in this.
Yeah,
one.
the media will be.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
we'll earmark that Wilsonville quote from their resolution. Moving on to Tigard. Their current stipend was established in a 2016 resolution, so yes, this is all within the past decade. And again, they acknowledge that there's a lot of meeting attendance in their elected officials' duties. And they also acknowledge that the mayor has duties above and beyond those held by counselors, so he or she is compensated a little more.
Yeah,
Ashland is fresh 2023 ballot measure. This passed in May. Before then, their mayor received $500 a year and counselors got $350 a year since 1954. So this was,
Wow.
a turn.
Ashley, the wrong.
Worked in 54.
Cola is important.
Yeah,
That was great.
that's a good point, Kathy, because
I mean,
yeah, because they had flat rates in 54, right?
right.
But no COLA to.
Yeah.
Move with. the
Make
times.
adjustments.
I mean, that was gonna be one of my major statements is we have to have a COLA or tied to CPI or something, because that is always an issue whenever you set a specific amount and there's no way to increase it with inflation. And then all of a sudden there's this big bump, whether it's your sewer fees or whatever, it's a disaster. So.
I agree with Kathy. But also, I think AMI is not a metric that the general public would understand very well, but cost of living increase is something everybody understands. So
Does the city have a kind of across the board increase that you provide, or how does that
I mean, for staff,
On an annual basis,
on an annual basis?
three unions we negotiate that with.
Yeah,
That's the lion's share of the city's workforce. So those are pre-negotiated rates. Sometimes they're a rate that's negotiated at a point in time and then carries through year 2, year 3 of the agreement. Other
Mhm.
times we do index it.
okay,
It just depends upon what the parties agree to at that time. There's a lot of factors that roll into what's to the city's advantage, whether it's a CPI based formula with
Yeah.
floors and ceilings or a fixed amount. It's a little bit of a gamble.
so there's no city metric that we could latch on to for the adjustment?
I mean, DOL has tons of metrics you could use for CPI and lots of variations of them as well. So I mean, that's one area to look at.
Yeah, I just was thinking if there was some adjustment
COLA is
factor
a sort of a
that,
universally.
you know, the mayor and city council would be adjusted by the same percentages
As staff.
of staff or whatever, yeah.
I guess. send this-
Well,
But it doesn't sound like that's a feasible.
Yeah.
yeah, we can get into discussing some of
The
those.
city council approves
other
the contract
potential.
too, so
Yeah.
by approving the contract, they would also be approving their own increase. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we need a set formula.
yeah, I
not
definitely.
tied to city
'Cause
employees, but we do.
Cost of
put that-
living has some flaws to it too,
Right,
and, you know, and so it's.
Or which
anyway.
index you even use is sometimes.
If you
Yeah.
look at your chart, Tigard had an example. They have flat amounts with a COLA.
Mhm.
Equal to that applied to the city's management and professional group.
Yeah.
And here, those employees aren't unionized.
No, the city manager decides that, so then the city manager is deciding how much the
Okay.
council gets.
Yeah, yeah, I think we want to stay, I think we should set something for council separate from
Okay.
city employees. It's.
Isn't there a
Yep.
federal COLA that's
Yeah.
published
Yeah, just
every year?
looking-
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's-
and widely understood, I think.
So,
So-
um,
Going to Ashland.
yeah, go back to- So now they're up to 900 monthly for mayor and councilors. It's equal.
That was,
They considered the amount of work that their officials do. And they also expressed that the intention is to enable any citizen of Ashland the opportunity to serve on council without experiencing undue financial impact.
I don't
and
think-
900
I don't
bucks
think
a
they've
month.
achieved their goal quite yet.
Well, the jump from 1954, so.
And lastly, St. Helens established their current percentage-based structure in 2007. And ultimately, they recognized that there had been historically a significant increase on the time commitments in their counselors and they wanted to compensate them for that.
Where is, I didn't know St. Helens is in Oregon.
Where is
It's at the bottom. St. Helens, oh yeah, it's up in north, it's,
Columbia.
yeah, it's east, it's west of Portland,
Are the county
along the river.
commissioners Full-time employees?
Yeah,
The county commissioners in Columbia County, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
It's St. Helens, yeah.
Yeah, they make $9,255 a month. Which is at the very bottom of your.
Well, so
chart.
that's interesting.
So out of the people that use the county commissioners as their structure, how big is St. Helens compared to the rest of their county? And that might not be information you have, but I'm curious to know because Bend is a significant margin of Deschutes County. So if we wanted to go towards that, what is the disparity between other
In terms of
cities?
Population?
Yeah, population size. So like, we have 100 and some thousand, our county's what, 250,000, give or take. So we have more than, less than half the population, but I don't know, just something, if we wanted to go down that route. I'm not saying we are, but just curious about that.
50% is an interesting number because it sort of implies that the mayor does 15% as much work as the county commissioner, and that's nonsense. That's just not remotely close. It's more like half.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, and that's what Gresham uses, right? They use not to exceed 45% of the compensation paid by an elected metro councilor, or no, excuse me, the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners,
For the mayor.
which makes a
yeah.
little bit more sense to how our structure is in my mind, at least.
Well, I'm not wild about tying something to.
No, me neither. I was just curious why how they
county
came up with those
Yeah.
numbers.
Speaking of percentages, how did the last committee come up with the 20% and 10%?
You mean for council and?
Yeah, the percentage of the average income.
Going back a ways, but I think it was just,
Arbitrary number.
yeah,
I'm joking. I know that's not what it is.
I mean, they equated it to what they wanted to pay, right?
Right.
I mean, they write in
They
the
work
ordinance, it
backwards.
says 64,000, so it was based on what they thought it should get paid.
And in
So
my
they kind of
It's
back-
time,
They
yeah.
kind of knew an amount and found a way to back
Exactly.
into
Yeah.
that amount.
Exactly,
With
and
the
then, like I
formula?
said, the
Okay.
philosophy was that council should go up and down with the economy like the rest of the community.
I figured it might have been like on an hourly thing. So like 10% of a 40-hour work week is about 4 hours. I don't know if that's what their thought process was at all.
They didn't get into it was just an amount that they thought was a good, as I recall, was the amount.
Doable for the budget.
Yeah, doable for the budget for.
And considering that.
$200
Yeah.
based on looking at other cities. Okay.
Could I just ask a quick question? Are you, in your presentation, are we going to be looking at any kind of city management salary ranges or anything like that?
In terms of City of Bend employees?
Mhm.
It's in the Bend
No,
folder.
because city councilors are not City of Bend employees.
I
they're
understand.
Volunteer elected officials, we deemed that employee salary info not relevant
Mm,
to these comparisons and discussions.
yeah,
Um,
I guess in my mind, they serve a management role. And, so I was just thinking, if you were looking at the
Sure.
average
Yeah.
amount of time
Okay,
that
let's
people
retell everyone,
spend.
look.
Yeah. it's in
The Bend Bulletin published the salary of every single city employee in the last couple of weeks. You can go online.
As well as other.
Get the trend.
In our
County.
Entities.
Oh, okay.
And
well,
and
that's
county
interesting.
commissioners and.
But I get you're coming from a philosophy.
The philosophy that I'm
Yes.
thinking of here is that we had some data on how much time people spent, and then it was all over the map. It seemed like in terms of the city councilors and the past city councilors and mayors and so forth. But if there was like an average amount of time that people spend, and that equated to sort of a management salary, what would that number be? Would that be a different way of approaching it? It was just,
Well,
I don't know.
I mean, Judy can speak as an elected official. In context, remember that there are still cities that treat city councilors as complete volunteers, right? So what the stipend approach is going from this idea that
Mhm.
right or wrong, elected officials, at least on the West Coast, I'm not sure how they do it everywhere else, but the West Coast that I know is it's a volunteer position, often unpaid. We've moved away from that, recognizing
Mhm.
the amount of time
Time,
it
right.
takes. So that's the philosophical change. Where I get a little concerned about looking like at hours and management is, I mean, I've represented a lot of counselors over the years, and I've seen some spend quite a bit of time and others spend a fraction of it.
Mhm.
Their effectiveness and constituents that they may happen to, it isn't necessarily equating to hours. The
I
same,
see.
we
Yeah.
don't review them as employees. We don't have any kind of process to
No.
say, you put in 50 hours, those were great hours. You put in 10 and
right.
look at,
Yeah.
there's no management. The voters are the managers. And
Yeah.
voters are probably not the ones we want. I mean, voters have.
No,
good
I
voters.
think that's really
There's no one
interesting.
else that manages.
Well, that's why I
but
put it out there,
voters.
because my experience and what you were just talking about, your experience is that it when I was on the council, it just took a huge amount of time out of my business. So I was
Yeah.
not making an income. I was sole practitioner. So if I wasn't working, I wasn't making any money. And if I was doing it in the city council, so for me, it would have been more helpful to make more money than $200 a month, but that's what it was. But the benefits of the health insurance is what made it for me.
Which
But
is
you know,
fair. I think that's.
if we want to attract younger people, people with children, people with their own business, that I
Well,
think would
you-
be tremendous to have on council. In my mind, they need to have some kind of compensation, whether it's what you were suggesting or something else.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I was just curious, okay, if we thought about it as a management type of position, what would that be for so many hours? What, if that's not relevant, that's fine. I just wanted to put it out there, but where I'm coming from.
Well, I think, yeah, I think I see what you're talking about, but I think what we have to do here is make the distinction. These are not employees.
Correct.
And that's where and their responsibilities in their job, yes, there may be quote unquote some managerial aspects of it, but primarily it's policymaking, it's budgeting, it's, it's representing the city. It's just this whole panoply of other, rather than the day-to-day, somebody comes into the office and this is what they have to do. I mean, it's a little bit broader perspective
Yes.
on the, yeah.
Yeah, just to. I know we're gonna talk about this another day, but I mean, the majority of the examples here offer health insurance of some form.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yep. And I think,
I'd have my own opinion about this, and you might too. If we asked you, what percentage of Melanie's time does she spend as mayor? Does she work? Does she spend half her time as mayor?
Yeah, last meeting, we gave info about weekly time estimates from former and current.
I don't remember.
right, yeah.
And the mayors that volunteered information, one said 15 hours a week, one said 25 to 30 a week, another said 10 a week. So Melanie being among them, that's that information.
Variety, yeah.
Yeah.
From those numbers, would you say the time commitment is increasing currently? As opposed to, or is it just kind of,
It's,
this person had this much time
Yeah,
available to
it's-
give and?
I think the expectation
Mhm.
of time has increased for
Yeah.
Yes.
every elected official.
Mm.
I don't think it's consistently increasing for every single person on that bench, because they all have different jobs and time commitments in their own lives.
Right.
Some work full-time and some don't,
So
so that consistency is there.
let's just say for the sake of argument, half-time, 20 hours a week. For mayor, maybe a little less for city councilor, so. Minimum wage in Oregon is $14.50 an hour, that's $30,000 a year, so that would suggest that a half-time minimum wage job pays $15,000. Working at McDonald's.
When I
Well-
had a conversation with Melanie in my interview, we talked about this and she said some weeks she puts in 20, 30 hours a week,
I'm not surprised.
which, and just from my
She's a very
perspective.
dedicated mayor, I mean.
I think it's that, but I think it's more than personal dedication and inclinations. I've been involved with city council committees for several years now, and just I have seen over the time I've been involved, councilors and mayors in particular, just be way more present and involved. And I mean, I'm sure you all have too. If you look at social media, if you're attending events, it is very common to see the mayor and councilors out attending events.
Showing up.
There's a lot more meetings now, as we expand the committees, then I think that we can expect these time commitments to continue to go up, but particularly for the mayor. And I do think it's more than just personal inclination to put time in. You gotta show it. The mayor has to show up to these things or they're not going to be an effective mayor, hands down.
So what, are you done with the presentation?
No, I'm getting ready to go to my next my next. question.
Okay, because I think these are all, this is all part of the conversation that we need to have when we're getting down into the discussing what the, how to determine an increase, what it should look like, the formula, if, you know, whatever.
The reason why I mention those numbers is because I'm struggling with the reality of our current circumstances. I mean, there's no way, I mean, we should pay the mayor way more often than we pay the kid who throws the french fries in the.
Yeah.
in the
And
oil
McDonald's.
in McDonald's, but you know, twice, 3, 4 times as much, but we're never gonna get there. I mean, we're not getting close to that.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, our goal is just to get to the next bus stop and hope the next people that come up with this committee that are in 2-3 years think the same way we do, right? Well, I'm not saying we all think the
Keep
same
moving,
way,
keep
but
moving in
But
the
keep
right
moving it in
direction.
the right direction, yeah, I think that's a good approach.
So to further facilitate this conversation and to be mindful of the city's budget, as we discussed earlier, this is a cost impact spreadsheet that was prepared by our finance department.
Oh, this is right.
And the purpose of this is to show how much it would cost the city to increase the stipend in any given amount. And as you see down here, this is an impact analysis for health insurance coverage, which I'll address at the next meeting. For the next few minutes, I'm only going to address the stipend increase component in lines 10 through 19. So I'll just walk you through these lines real quick. There's 7 members of the council. So there's 6 council stipends and 1 mayor.
Okay.
Currently, the mayor is paid that 19 figure. And likewise for council, they're paid about 9. In these boxes, if I input something higher, so say we want to give the mayor 30,000 a year, just hypothetically, and increase counselors to say 20,000 a year annually, then
That's pretty good.
that shows, so where my cursor is now, it would be
Right,
an increase, so it would cost the city 168,000 a year to compensate them. And that would be 80,000 more than what the city already pays for the current stipends. Does that all? add
So
up?
we thought you could use this tool if you had some ideas on amounts.
I see.
You didn't want to have to do the math in your head really
Yep.
quick. Like, what does that mean? You don't have to worry.
I would
about
never have to
doing the
be able to
budget.
do the math in my head very quick.
That's really cool.
No,
Yeah.
not
You
gonna
could
happen.
Give us numbers.
Those of
or
you who
Anybody could propose.
out of my
something
bailiwick.
That they were thinking, and we could have a.
It would be
That's a
hard for
great,
me to
yeah.
understand what the overall impact that would be in the
On the
general fund.
budget.
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
I mean,
is it a teeny amount? Is it a big amount?
It's a, yeah.
It
Oh,
seems
these
like
are
it would be
teeny
very
amounts,
small.
but the
I mean, more
annual
money is
city
more
budget
money, but
is,
it's still a teeny amount.
Yeah, what's
It's a
the,
small amount.
what's the annual city budget?
What's the
But it's
total budget?
unbudgeted, right?
What's the total?
The city's total budget is
I know. I forget what I should know.
$80 million. I mean, it's a huge number.
It's a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Those were the next
I think
ones.
That's my sense,
I
but
thought-
since
I was
I
gonna
don't
say, I think
really
it's
know
somewhere
that
in that
number, it's
neighborhood.
like,
You have to,
1/10 of 1%.
giving you the overall budget, which Rob is looking up, is,
1.3 billion.
Oh, wow.
but it's complicated
That's
because.
2 year, but
That's
that-
two
Two-year
That's
budget,
what I thought.
right,
About
yeah.
80
revenue
800,
funds that are
restricted.
Restricted.
Right, so
750 to 800.
well, that's why I said
So
general
this
fund.
is
as
general
opposed-
fund.
Yeah,
So it's
Which
less
is
than
police,
1/10 of 1%.
fire, and
Can't
a
do
little
that.
bit of planning and streets.
But we can't do.
That's the budget that
Mhm.
council would,
Well, that they have responsibility for,
yeah,
yeah.
but I think. What we want you to just know is like, what is that number, but it's up to us with the recommendation is figure out where's that budget coming from.
Right.
You don't need to do a budget exercise and.
I have another question. So all these numbers are transparent to the public, right?
Yeah.
Including the health insurance costs.
Yes.
But if we made an announcement that we were gonna increase mayor and city council budgets by X% or whatever, some understandable number for the public. And we were also gonna provide them with health insurance, and we didn't disclose the value of the health insurance in the press release. Somebody could go dig it up if they wanted it to, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
we
but
we know
nobody-
what our health insurance, because.
Right, well, it's right there.
Yeah, we'll know exactly.
But in other words,
That's where.
or a. What kind of allowance did you call it, Chris?
Flex.
I call it a flex
A
allowance.
flex account?
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's getting,
So if anyone wants to, if you want to start like really diving into your discussion
I'm-
about a stipend recommendation, addressing the
Yep.
formula.
Yep.
I'm happy to use this tool with you and to plug in
yeah, I was
any,
gonna say that,
any ideas.
that
you
is
want to
a
discuss.
sort of the logical next step here, I think.
I don't want to deflate the conversation, but it's hard for me to think about this without understanding kind of the cost of the benefits.
Me too.
I completely agree.
Because it's a combination of the two, and you know, somebody could turn down the health insurance, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in
We
these
can give
circumstances.
you that
there
number.
was a time
We,
when
we
my
give a
husband
number
was
to
like,
new
"You know,
employees about. Like, what is the
total
value of the benefit? Without getting it, the way we do benefits, it's a high deductible plan and the city funds portions of it. So we have to explain how the plan works because council will be part of our plan. So that number is a little bit artificial, but it's like 12 to 15,000, isn't that what we tell?
Is it only, are you only offering high deductible?
Depends, it all depends on a lot of factors. Are you single covered? Are you family covered?
Family coverage is 18, single coverage is 8. It's right up there.
Oh, so, yeah. So that, I mean, the value
Oh,
of our benefits. Well, that's what it costs per year and what the employee pays. So
And
we cover.
city employees are fully paid for? Or is they make
No.
a contribution?
10%.
10% contribution.
Yeah.
You make a 10% contribution and the city pays 90%.
Yeah.
And Rob, what's the salary escalation agreements with the unions right now?
Depends on the union. Generally speaking, the COLA is 4% a year.
4%.
Yes.
So if we gave them a 4% increase, well, but they're gonna get that anyway. They get that with the AMI.
But I think we're talking about
Well, you're,
going away from AMI.
Well, whatever it is. it's-
Yeah,
but Some,
yeah,
there'll
yeah.
be some escalation of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing I'm not saying consensus, but I'm hearing several people interested in having some sort of set increase
Mhm.
going forward.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too.
I'm more interested in a flat rate with an increase every couple of years based off of whatever percent we think is appropriate.
Well, COLA is the easiest one to do.
But I think it's the most palatable. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I just Googled and see if I can pull it back up again. They said December 1st, 2023. So I put in for the public sector. For the public sector in Oregon, there was a COLA of 6.5%. So for state
Hey.
employees, which is the highest, that was an exceptionally high COLA
Well,
increase.
inflation was so high this last
Because-
year, and
Yeah, they may have had a catch up, but I think COLA is somewhere between 2.5 to.
Yeah.
6 is pretty high, but you see these ranges for COLAs.
if you looked at salary increase data, it would be probably less than that COLA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that could be, and Oregon is considered one of the higher,
Yeah,
it's like one of the highest in the nation for cost of living right now.
Well, the
So,
CPI for the western states right now is coming out about 4%.
It's
It's
about
3.9.
Yeah.
Cause I just checked it this week.
Yeah.
mm,
So 4%.
And it was 8 last year, though.
The COLA generally can range widely. Like in my experience, I don't get COLA in my current job, but I had a lot of years where I got COLA and it's anywhere from 1.5% to, you know, in the 3 percentage points. It was
Right.
never
no,
6%.
well, not never, but
In my experience, I have never had a 6% COLA. So that's
you know.
that's a good year for employees, especially if you get merit increase on top of it.
well, from a salary increase standpoint, for years and years and years, when inflation was pretty steady, it was about 3%.
Yeah.
That was the number.
Mhm.
We adjusted data based on that. And I talked with some consultant buddies that are still in the business. And they said it's around 4%. So salary increase percentages are more constant. COLA tends to
Yeah,
fluctuate quite a bit,
Salary percentage increase.
salary percentage increase. And there are databases where you can get that, you know, broken out by type of job or however you want to do it.
I'm wondering if how specific the recommendation needs to be
think it-
today. Like, can we say to you, we would like to see some sort of COLA increase, and then you would go and figure out what might be reasonable or give us some recommendation? Like, how specific?
We talked to Judy about this, you
Yeah.
know, we were hoping to actually have
A recommendation
stipend
today.
recommendation today. We predicted that you might not be ready to make a stipend recommendation without the benefits discussion. And would want to wrap those together, but we were at least hoping, like, let's make the assumption that there's going to be some sort of benefits. Even with that, like, start talking, like, are people in this room thinking 50% more or 200% more, like to at least
Well,
have some discussion of what do you
And a
think
formula
we
and,
can vote on
and what it
but-
might be attached to. I mean,
Right.
you know, that's,
Yeah.
there've been multiple, I
Exactly,
mean,
like start talking.
whether it's the, yeah,
If we said,
what the,
you know, we want to
Sort of how the
attach it
calculation
to,
should be,
to
yeah.
city compensation data, and this is our marketplace. You know, we'd probably be looking at the 50th percentile number down here.
That's
Something like that.
doubling or increasing the mayor's pay by 40%.
Yeah,
What I'm sort of thinking about, since we're talking about the city, I'm wondering if the mayor and council compensation, if it makes sense to tie it to what city employees are making in terms of, you know, is it some percentage of the manager level group? Is it something like that, rather than saying? Because otherwise it's throwing darts, like, oh, well, we think it should be this much.
Well,
But it
that's what I
does-
was suggesting, but then I was told that that's not,
Yeah,
you don't want to
kinda
consider
got
them
shot down
employees.
a little bit.
I
I don't know how you avoid that.
well,
I mean, other cities have apparently done it, they've looked at numbers and. I mean, I guess I would ask Stephen, who's been on council and part of the community and have to run for council, do you have a sense of what is needed to be able to do a job, also be a volunteer council member
Sure.
and attract candidates, I mean, the things that we're looking to do.
Well, I think unfortunately, thinking about actual running for council may not be what we're discussing here. I don't think that's really, unfortunately, I don't think that's a discussion point, because I think
Another issue too, though.
it's not like it's not an
Getting
issue.
expensive.
I agree,
Campaign
but the
costs.
campaign costs and campaign time is on a whole nother trajectory. Cause I probably, when I was running or planning to run with council on top of that, that's probably a 35-hour a week commitment. But so we take away the actual campaigning, going door to door, making calls, all that stuff. A good counselor, in my opinion, should be doing 15 to 20 hours a week, and a mayor should be doing 25 to 30 hours a week. And that's going to meetings, that is discussing things with community partners like Embrace Bend, that is going to different conferences, and that's attending city council meetings. If we are a rapidly growing city, we all know that we're in the top 50 cities in the nation that are growing at our rate, which is ridiculous. We have to have council members that understand, because we're at a crucial crux of our growth and where we are heading as a city. So we want to attract counselors that understand that, but also have a time commitment, so we're growing the next 10 to 20 years in the right direction. And I think this is a really important time for us to discuss what that number looks like. So that's just my numbers and why I think those numbers are important. But of course, like Mary and Brooke said earlier, those numbers, depending on who your counselor is and your mayor is, changes a lot. But we want to attract the people that want to do 15, 20 hours a week, in my opinion. We may not get those people,
that
but
are gonna come in with that. So just because you said it out loud and I looked it up and I can't leave it just hanging out in there. Columbia County is 53,000 people in 2021. So in comparison to St. Helens, and just because others are tied to their county commissioners, our county commissioners just raised their annual salary to $125,000 a year. So if you were looking at a percentage and attaching it to county commissioners, that would be what you would be looking at taking a percentage of.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's another.
So.
so they're about, St. Helens is about 1/3
mhm,
of their county.
mhm.
Interesting.
I mean, what would it look like to do 50% of
Fif-
county commissioner?
Well, if my calculator
60,000.
didn't lie, it's like 18,000 would be 15% of that.
Okay,
No, 50.
Oh, 50.
of 120, so 60,000.
Yeah, 60.
If we kind of look at it about a half-time equivalent of
Talking about the mayor.
Or. counselor?
Yeah.
mayor,
Man,
and then the counselor would be,
less.
what, 30%?
Yeah, and that's 37,500. That's what I just hit.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
again, let's look at, I mean, minimum wage, if the numbers that you're talking about in terms of time commitment, Steve,
Mhm.
are. If we just paid minimum wage, we'd double everybody's salary.
I think that's a powerful statement to the
Yeah.
public
Mhm.
of, just paying minimum wage for doing this job translates really easy. And I feel like that's our basement.
But if you go to that statement that
Except
says,
for us, it could be litigate, so counselors.
Yeah,
If we had a claim from a former counselor, based on what this committee said, that we should be getting minimum wage, that is a minimum wage lawsuit.
Yeah.
Right,
Right.
we've already had.
I was gonna
HRC
say,
have to
yeah.
go
I'm not
away from
advocating for
minimum
using
wage.
that in a
is
press
part-
release.
That actually, I think it's been an issue in other places, like,
Yeah.
we don't track counselors' hours, we don't expect them to do.
Mary,
it, so
we're not-
We just have to be real.
Yeah.
But just as
I
context.
get it's context,
yeah.
I totally get the argument, it's just, it's just.
I mean,
that-
we're
we
sitting here
totally get
valuing
it.
time.
I know.
We're sitting here
And
valuing
that's
time
completely
and that's,
legitimate.
so
Yeah, we
it-
totally get that.
I can adjust that to
Yeah.
say.
Well, and
That $30,000 should be our basement is what
Taking
I'm
away from
putting on the
your
floor.
Or your family, I mean, to
Right.
me, those are like, if you
Yeah,
try to do
you're-
this and have a full-time job, it's one thing if you're a public sector employee and they give you time off, it's another thing if you're running a business and you're
Right.
actually losing work.
I was thinking about it,
Right.
Mary, more from an equity point of view. In other words,
Yeah.
if you're looking for a disadvantaged person who would aspire to public service and they have two jobs and they're working minimum wage, then they gotta at least make up for one of those two
For
jobs
the loss.
Mhm.
if they're gonna come and work on city council.
And to
so
Mary's point, that's if your boss is
that's
flexible.
That's a bare
Right.
minimum, so the
Right.
bare minimum.
You're gonna be in a
Be
white collar
somewhere in the-
position if your boss is
Yeah.
flexible. I mean, I have to say though, and I agree with your concerns about minimum wage. I personally don't know any businesses that are keeping employees paying minimum wage. So I think
McDonald's doesn't pay
dispense
minimum wage
yeah,
anyway.
with
McDonald's
minimum
is
wage,
this one.
that is not a reality in Central Oregon.
I found the article.
yeah, and I think, I mean, I think that, how do I say this, the comprehension of the fact that our elected officials at the city level are paid under what a hamburger tosser at McDonald's would be making. I mean, yeah, that gets to be, I mean, I think that can definitely be a part of a conversation you have with somebody on the side and saying, why did you do what you did? But again, I think we have to be very careful and very cautious about how we approach that.
Yeah.
From the standpoint that, yes, these are elected officials. They are elected to do a job and we're not in, one of the things, I mean, it's as a state legislator, when I was in the legislature, I think our salary was about maybe $32,000 a year. And I mean, it was considered full-time, even when I wasn't technically when I wasn't, in a session, I still couldn't refuse to do the job the other 6 months of the year or the other 11 months of the year in the short session year. So, and yeah, there was compensation for travel and the mileage and things like that, just as there are for the counselors here. But, there's a different expectation, I think, to some degree with respect to elected officials. But again, what you want to be able to do is you want to broaden that pool. You want to make sure that you can have voices heard on your council. So-
I know, Brooke, you said it wasn't relevant, but I think it's directly relevant. There are more than 25 public officials in our community who make more than $200,000 a year. in the fire department, in the city government.
Oh,
in the
elected?
Parks Department, not elected. I'm
no,
talking about
not,
the-
okay, yeah,
This is the article from the Ben.
right.
So,
Non-elected.
so it's not like we underpay our staff. But we drastically underpay our public officials.
Yeah.
Again, recognizing that, like you said, the responsibility of being mayor is dramatically different than working a cash register at McDonald's.
Oh, totally.
And so like,
That's
we're
the
not,
other thing that makes
but
me a little concerned
we're not
about talking
close to
about
what they're
minimum
paying,
wage,
what
because
McDonald's is
same
paying.
skill set.
Well, and again, I mean, that's one of the concerns about talking minimum wage. The other is even taught, but I mean, I think that's obviously part of the, when we're looking at how do we put this together and how do we come up with some formula that makes sense? I'm not sure that's something we want to talk to the public about, but what we definitely, you've got to put value to the work they do. I guess that's the bottom line. And how do we calculate that value?
Honestly, I think we're in a place where I like what you said, Steve, about moving it in the right direction. There's no way we're gonna get to that.
Oh, no. I know that. I'm just saying, but yeah, what is it? How do we approach?
I don't know, are we politically savvy enough to understand what the public's gonna swallow? Like.
The public isn't making a decision about.
They're gonna react to it.
Well, they do, public reacts to everything.
Well, and I think a lot of it has to do with how we sort of package it and how we talk about it.
To some
And-
extent.
So some of the discussion in here and what we had was about the county commission. And if we look at halftime of what the county commissioners make, that would be 62,500. So maybe that's something that we could look at for the mayor. And if we took a third of it, it's 37,500. I'm just throwing those numbers out there. Does that sound, I mean, because there's some rationale. We're looking at our
Other
other
elected
elected officials. What are they making and what do we assume the percentages of? And we've gotten some hours and we can average them out. So I'm just thinking halftime, for the mayor and a third for the council. I'm
And the-
throwing it out there
and the
as a
Ben-
discussion.
And the Ben Bulletin story says city council votes to double its pay.
Then it
That's
does.
Well, so what? So what? Honestly, because they deserve it.
I'm not sure the county, I'm not sure the
Well,
council would
the
agree.
council may
politically
not get
difficult.
reelected.
They have to get
because of it.
elected.
I know that. But on the other hand, I
Like
think,
for city council.
no, I love our city council,
Well,
but I'm just saying that.
I mean, literally part of this is part of the structure here is how this gets presented. I
Mhm.
mean, that's a big part of the picture. It
Right.
really is. I mean, we have to come up with a formula that makes sense, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, I think, obviously, and we'll dive deeper into that the next meeting. The
For the county.
the issue of benefits and whether that should be part of it or not, and how that impacts the picture overall. And then I think what we have to do is approach it from the perspective that, and quite frankly, the fact that the county commissioners have voted themselves, what these people will be doing is accepting or rejecting a resolution that we as a commission or a committee, whatever we're officially called, present to them. And yeah, they're gonna be voting it in or not, but it's coming a different route than for instance, the county commission did. And
How big a percentage increase did the county commissioners give themselves?
I think
The article, I think it was 111. I think they went from 111 to 125.
So
And
not like.
that's a full-time job.
That's a
That's
full-
a-
well,
Yeah,
they don't
there's-
keep track of it technically is, but it's not like they have to punch a time card.
Well, they're
Well,
salaried
they're-
employees,
they're-
a salaried employee does.
But they're.
Well, no, they
paid as
don't.
if
No.
it's a-
No, they don't. Okay, for instance, when my husband was the district attorney, okay, he was paid a salary. There was no time punching, time card punching. He was expected to do his job
Yeah, same with me.
24/7, that kind of thing. Yeah, but there wasn't any kind of, technically he
What
was
did
a
they
salaried
correct from
employee, but he was.
125.
125, yeah, and they have a state statute that allows them to
Yeah.
increase their own salary. I thought
It-
it was interesting what you said. I just looked up what state legislature I've read before, they seem woefully underpaid.
13%
It's, I think it's 35,000 during the short session and up to 64,000.
That includes,
Per diem,
that includes the
includes the
per
per
diem.
diem
The
for the
actual
long
salary part
section.
is
Say the
still
number
the,
again.
yeah.
35,000. Up to
Went up
64,000, which I read
3,000.
it's essentially a full-time job for state legislators.
Oh,
Many have to
yeah.
give up a lot of their regular jobs, and yet they're paid like half of what they're paid in Washington State.
Well,
I'm not sure that's a standard we should compare.
No, I was just interested. to
But
see
but
what it
you know,
was.
the point that you make about the county commission, yes, there are provisions in state law. We have,
Ask them to ask
we
them.
have treated our city elected officials much differently in this state for
Very
a
long
couple of centuries.
Other
Plus,
states do as well.
I know, and it's just, you know, the expectations are the same,
Right.
but you know,
And so for me, looking at it, there is a change of philosophy of service and what's possible in public service and who can serve. And we are living in a time where that is shifting. And it's part of the rub of our political process right now,
Yeah.
is that. And if we are gonna go with the philosophy just right out of the gate that everybody's time is valuable and you need to pay them and compensate them accurately for their time and set aside notions of Kennedy era, what can you do for your country, and public service is something you just do because our current economy and climate and society doesn't allow for that, then we've agreed on that part of our philosophy. And then it just becomes about what is fair
How,
compensation
what
for
is,
what
yeah.
we're doing.
and how do
Right.
how do we,
Right.
So we,
yeah,
That's very nice.
yeah.
I don't have the answer for this, but we still need to have a basis for what we
Base
come
it
up
on,
with. I mean,
right.
yeah.
And if we want to look at the county commissioners and what they're managing, I was whispering over here, so the county commissioners are managing 1,251.76 people. I don't know who the 0.76 is, but you know, so, and the city's managing, you know, a staff of 750 or 780. You know,
Well, and the thing that people forget with respect to the county, which is really, they are not managing all of those people.
No.
You
Right.
have like 6 elected officials. You have the
Mhm.
commissioners, you have the DA, you have
you
the
have
county assessor, the county treasurer, the county clerk.
totally different.
And they are in,
Of
whereas
departments and-
they may
Mhm.
set the budget, the management aspect of it is within the hands of those elected officials in those respective departments.
The only employees of the council are the city manager and the municipal judge. They
Judge.
have no, but I think the
Yeah.
comparison that I like is that when you're looking at Central Oregon and
Yeah.
to be an elected official in Central Oregon, these particular people who run for county commission get paid this. The ones that run for city council, their stipend is so much lower, and
Mhm.
yet the expectations of the community
Is
are not
greater.
that different.
Right.
Maybe more for
Yeah.
city. So to me, that's
Probably
a
greater, yeah.
valid
Yeah.
I think you're right, Kelly. Yeah.
You're asking,
for
we're asking
not
them all the
managing
time.
People so much as what are they expected to do for
Right.
politics, ordinances, I mean, they're
Yeah.
constantly
Yeah.
adopting plans, we probably
Yeah.
do more in the management of complicated statewide issues. at
Issues,
city
policy
level
and.
Right.
Than is expected, the things coming out right now from the governor's office for housing, and it's so much for cities.
And all the time, we, the public, are hearing about the commissioners and the counselors working together on X, Y, or Z.
Yeah,
So,
so I think that's a fair.
So could I ask a
affordable
question on
comparison.
the $125,000 the county commission gets? That doesn't include, or it does include their health insurance?
Just the salary.
That's
It's
just the
just a
salary,
salary.
yeah.
So then they have the benefit.
And they have
Yeah.
county
As
benefits.
well.
Oh,
So I just
yeah.
wanted to make sure we're talking about. the
Oh, yeah.
same
They have
thing.
county benefits.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, personally, $125,000 in today's age for what they do is not a
Oh,
lot.
yeah.
Not much money.
Right. It is.
Yeah, but
It's-
that's a good.
it's not-
That's interesting.
Mhm.
But I feel like it's
Your
a
numbers make sense.
equivalent we have to find a comparison somewhere.
So
Right.
Mary just said
Yeah.
the numbers
Right.
made sense. Does anybody else think?
They have a rational-
I
I
mean,
think the 50% for mayors and the 30% for counselors is a good place to ask staff to be like, would this seem like a reasonable budget hit?
But that's a huge increase.
I mean, we put the numbers up there.
It is.
It also was the number one state for council.
Anything's gonna be a huge increase.
Anything, yeah, anything we do, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's.
Not saying that's right or wrong.
That sentence that was up there.
I couldn't agree more. Trust me, as a renter, let me tell you.
Okay, guys. Whoop, 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 let's get it back.
I love the sentence that was up there before, but I think the sentence for us is a different sentence. Because I think the sentence for us is as much as we can give them without hurting them politically. Anthony's running for state senate.
There's an
He doesn't-
element of that.
You don't want to give his opponent a talking point that says he gave himself 100% raise.
Except he isn't getting
But he
himself
isn't gonna get
100%
it.
raise.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he's gonna
No,
get it
none of
eventually.
the current council is going to
They're gonna
get
get it
this.
as soon as they get reelected.
Well, that
If
may
they-
be.
Well,
they
some
have
of them
to
choose elected to next year, but that's only 3 or 4 of them. The others won't be reelected until the next election
Yeah.
cycle if they run again. So it's a ways out. And we actually say that in
That's
the
not what,
code.
that's not what the
But-
public's gonna hear.
No, again,
Almost anyways, they
you
double
know,
their
a part of the whole issue here is presentation and.
Yeah, But my suggestion, having been in the meetings with council, is your job is to come up with the number and the rationale. Their job is to deal with the politics.
Mhm.
Like,
Sure.
that's,
Unfortunately, this number is part of that, right? This
You're
is
right.
what is a number that would make someone willing to put up with the grueling nastiness that comes with being a city councilor these days? We're not asking them to do a fun job,
No, it's a terrible job.
right?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah,
would do
just
that?
to argue that.
Huh?
Not a lot of people want it.
No, well, it's a matter of perspective here. It's,
Yeah.
you don't run for a position like this if you're not willing to take on
Take
the,
on that. And that's really where I was headed with that comment was,
yeah.
they know what they're getting into with the politics.
They
There's,
do.
there's no
Absolutely.
illusions about that in this day and age, that is their job to
Yeah.
say, I may regret this, it may be the last thing I do as a city councilor, but
Yeah,
again, it comes down to the philosophy that we as a group are trying to adhere to, is our philosophy that we need to pay people what they're
A
worth,
reasonable
a reasonable wage.
amount, not a
You
wage.
not
no, let's not
wage.
refer to wage,
I
no
know.
wage.
Stipend.
Stipend.
It's not, you say compensation.
Compensation, whatever
Whatever
the
they-
right word that I need is here.
Well, again, thinking about it through the equity lens, when you look at these numbers, you'd say that $18,000 is a really important number from the point of view of the equity lens.
That would be 30.
So-
That'd be 30% of what they make.
30%.
Yeah, no.
One of the things that stands out, and again, we're not supposed to talk benefits, but in the benefits
You wrote
column
27.
over here is some of the flexibility that you've
Yeah.
suggested,
Mhm.
that they
Vehicle
choose
allowance.
to buy in, but they have to buy all of their health insurance.
What's that?
vehicle allowances are super complicated with IRS rules and
Yeah, no.
yeah.
Right.
that-
City
But-
councilors have access to city cars?
I don't know if they ever use the city cars.
I've
I never use the city car, so I don't know.
But they get
Um,
mileage reimbursement.
Yeah.
So there's-
For like a conference
Yeah.
and.
Well,
Just curious.
you know, I'm thinking for the purposes of today, because obviously this is not a finished conversation.
Yeah.
And I think if we can come to some kind of a consensus, and I'm not gonna go so far as to say agreement. It has a whole different, you know, but consensus as to the sort of formulaic approach to how, to any increase in the stipend aspect of it. Now, I think ultimately, I think everybody's right who's talked about this, that, you know, if we're gonna have the conversation about the benefits too, obviously that has some impact in the bottom line.
I think philosophically, we might all agree that looking at the county commission wage, whatever that percent may look like, I'm not saying it's 50, I'm not saying it's 30, but the discussion's heavily been in this conversation so far that we're looking at county commission and we're gonna base our percent off that. Now, what that percent, like you said, we may not agree, but that may be our consensus that we're gonna base a percent off that.
Do we have consensus?
I wish we could find something more independent of that, you know, it's sort of, I don't know.
Well, the one advantage, yeah.
I think that's the closest we've come.
To consent. Well, and I do think that in some respects, that makes some sense from the perspective that those are elected public officials as well. And if we're trying to look for a rationale, a rational approach to increasing, you know, the stipend, the pay of the city's elected officials, I think that's a sort of a good platform to play off of, to, you know, to do the analysis or whatever.
Well, and they're living in Central Oregon.
Yeah.
They have our cost of living that we're dealing with here. And they are performing a similar job, but full-time versus what we're saying, we're coming up with like a 30% or a half time. I would agree, which is why I suggested it. It seems like some of the other cities have done that too. It's not like we're pulling this completely out of the air.
Right.
Do we know the numbers on the Bend Parks and Rec as well as the Bend Lapine School
Sure.
District?
I got those two.
Those are elected officials in our community, so
I don't think. they-
Well,
Oh.
what are you talking about? That,
just curious.
The board?
not the board,
They
the
get
board,
nothing.
they don't
They
get.
don't get paid at all.
Okay.
There's
And neither the school board, they usually get like travel and they have to go to a meeting somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I know what they do. I was
But-
just curious.
No.
Don
Oh,
Horton,
yeah,
Don
yeah,
Horton
yeah.
makes $228,000.
And Deb, who's not here, is a member of the Parks Board,
Yes.
so.
Yes, she-
When
Yeah.
she's here next time, hopefully she can.
And she's the chair,
She's the chair.
I believe so.
I think I think
She
you're
is.
right. I think she is now. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah, no, but the non-elected employees tend to,
They're not.
What about
Definitely.
the COLA ideas? Does anybody have any?
What's the
thoughts
federal
on-
COLA? Is that, would that, cause it's, so first I was like tying it to COLAs within the city, but then it varies paying from the contract. So that's a problem.
yeah, that is,
Yeah. So would the federal COLA be,
Federal government COLA?
Well,
Federal.
I would recommend the CPI for the Western states
Okay,
because it's
okay.
more, I think, accurate for our cost of
Okay.
living.
8.7% is the federal COLA.
what's the CPI? Wow. 8.6.
Right now, it's 3.9 as of this month
For the Western.
for the Western states. Last year, it was 8%.
Wow.
In 2023.
There's a big-
But the
big
year before that,
variations.
it was 3%.
Yeah, it was down lower 5 and
So would we be talking then about an initial determination of X% of the county commissioners, you know, salaries or their pay, whatever we want to call it? And then we're talking about the either CPI, the COLA, or the, what was the other one, AMI? What-
I don't think we.
No, I don't.
We're not doing the AMI, okay.
I think
Good.
the
But the
CPI for
CPI
Western states,
But would we, let me finish
done
here.
by the
Would we be
federal
talking
government.
about that then going forward? Is that what is being suggested?
So
So
that-
that would be the calculation
Code would
in the
say-
future.
that
Yeah.
would be my
Annually.
suggestion.
Okay.
Is that
Okay.
CPI is done annually? Do you have any idea if you're setting, so it would be every year that there would be an increase based on the CPI?
Yeah,
So-
and-
So that'd be a
So
flat amount.
what do you use to determine the increase
Yeah.
for like non-union?
A lot of things. We look at what the union receives, number one, so our comp plans will remain.
Cost, yeah.
Been down this road.
But for non-union, it's up to the city manager to decide. So we'll look at market, we will look at inflation, we will look at represented, and we try to balance those out and think of the best path we can. So generally speaking, it tracks the labor contracts,
Yeah.
generally.
Right.
But
Representative
that's not
tends to
something we
raise
could
all votes.
could use as an adjustment.
I wouldn't suggest using any index that's tied to anything the city produces,
Okay.
because the council
Yeah,
is gonna
yeah.
touch that.
Okay.
side.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good,
Well, I just-
so that,
Another
then the
reason
C,
We need
every
to-
year that we don't want.
Yeah,
so the CPI would be totally, that's,
Separate.
yep, that's
But if we went to
if we
50
go with CPI, we just need to understand that it's gonna be variable.
right.
You know,
Yes.
Totally.
it's Gonna have some,
And I think that's
Costs.
reality. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know, I think that
But if
but
we-
salary
went
increases
to
generally
50%.
are not that variable.
If you went to 50% of the county commission, that would increase the mayor's pay to $62,000 from $19,000.
What'd you say? I'm sorry, Lou.
If you went to 50% of the county commissioners' pay, you'd pay the mayor $62,000
Yeah.
up from $19,000.
If we say.
Well, we haven't- yeah.
I was thinking about that, and if we were saying the mayor works 30 hours a week, so
20 to 30.
20 to 30.
Half
I
time.
think that was the range.
Call it half.
Well, if it's 20 hours a week and 40 hours is full time, then that would be the equivalent of $120,000, $125,000
Which is
salary.
what they pay the county commissioners.
Yeah, yeah.
So what, wait a minute, what would be the,
So I wasn't suggesting going more than half time. I mean,
more than
Yeah, that
50%?
that should be the ceiling.
I was
That-
thinking,
yeah.
we're talking about her working 30 hours a week, and that'd be equivalent of like 80.
No, I don't think we're tying it to the hours.
Yeah, no,
That-
no,
that
I know.
The
I'm just
compensation isn't gonna be tied, but that was, I
Trying
mean,
to
yeah.
sort of think about that.
I like the idea from the sort of, what's palatable to the public. I like the idea of saying that we're changing the way we compensate our public officials, and we're gonna tie their compensation more closely to
Other.
the county commissioners. And that's a new way of calculating their compensation, and talk mostly about that and less about what the percentage increase is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't.
And talk more about
remember.
things like fairness and competitiveness.
Right,
Yeah,
Yeah,
bearing
right.
in mind that the mayor was elected in 2022 to a 4-year term. So even this number wouldn't take effect until 2026.
right.
So it's quite a delay before a new mayor would receive.
Well, but the county commissioners will be making more in 2026 too.
Yeah, it's gonna be hard for the
It's
mayor.
possible. If they're just on COLA, they'll be making more.
That's.
It is what it
it's
is.
possible.
But that's,
So that would
but
be a question.
but that-
Actually, that makes it a
That
little
would be a
easier.
question for you all,
Yeah.
just for drafting, and this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but
I'm not allowed to
Does-
pick words.
does the, you can't, does the CPI increase start upon adoption of the ordinance or upon?
I would
the
recommend
paying
that.
of the person?
Yep, I would recommend
Yeah.
immediately.
Adoption.
So our benefits recommendation also wouldn't kick in for the mayor. I mean, none of this
None
would
of
kick
this
in.
would kick in,
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
Wow.
well, if we adopted the CPI as part of it, would that then impact them on an annual basis? Existing, starting in 2024? No, all of it, the way the current, the way
the
the
ethics rules work is
Okay.
they cannot vote for anything for themselves without an intervening election.
an intervening election, right,
Yes,
right.
I expressly asked this question because there's some nuances in the admin rules that talk about an official compensation package. And my argument to the Ethics Commission was, can't an official compensation package be part of the budget? And therefore not subject to the ethics rules that prevent us from instituting benefits, like health benefits outside. And I got an answer back from them and they said no. And they said, if you want, they said you can seek an opinion, which anyways, they were.
Well, formal
pretty-
opinion from
yeah, they
the
were
State
pretty
Ethics
definitive.
Commission, yeah.
No, benefits are under the city council's benefits are the same as compensation
Right.
for the purposes of the ethics rules that prevent them from voting on something for themselves.
Yeah, and they've got good people there at the ethics.
Yeah,
I was on the
they
Ethics
gave me
Commission
a
for
long
4 years.
answer, and
They're
did-
not, they're
They
smart.
gave me a whole analysis.
yeah.
and So. I
And you
definitely
could do the-
tried.
you
I
could do,
tried 'cause
but-
I thought I had an argument, but they said no.
Yeah,
And in
Okay.
terms of counselors, they're gonna be up for reelection.
it's
It depends
a
on the
cycle,
council.
yeah.
Depends on the
3 will be up in
Right.
2024 and then 2 after that.
position,
And then the mayor,
and 3 after
3
that,
after that.
and then the
So
mayor
it's-
along with them.
It's staggered.
Yeah,
Okay.
they staggered.
That's what I thought.
But I would recommend that you kick in the CPI calculation upon approval, not just when it gets awarded, so that it's keeping up until such time, because it's several years out that the mayor is going to, whoever's mayor at that time will get this.
So in 2026, everyone gets the CPI. But then,
well, none of them can get this, I think what you're saying is the CPI would be calculated into
Would increase the number.
Number
When they.
when they
elected.
are, become eligible to actually receive it, it would have been bumped
It
up
would
by
have
the,
bumped up.
by the
Correct,
CPI.
that is what I'm
Right.
suggesting.
that, okay.
So counselors are gonna, some counselors are gonna make more than
Mhm.
the mayor for a period of time under this,
Yeah.
just because of the way the ethics.
There's just no, yeah, and there's no way around that.
The way it
It's
was
just so we all understand that.
$200, while the newly elected one's got the new
That's
number.
Yeah.
I crunched some numbers.
Uh-oh,
If we pay 50% and 30%, that's a number that I don't think we're gonna recommend. I mean, that's $62,000 for the mayor. But if we pay 30%
Wait,
and 10%,
why do you think we're not gonna
Why?
recommend
well, it
that?
just seems like an enormous, I mean, there's a huge jump.
I know that, you keep saying.
Okay, but okay,
that's
so I'll
important
give it to you that way then. So half the county commission pay for the mayor would be $62,000. 30% of the county commission pay for the city council would be $37,000.
Correct.
If you went to 30% for the mayor and 10% for the city council, you would pay
37 for the mayor,
37,000 for the mayor and
12,500. 12,500.
12,500 for the city council. Those numbers are very close to the average in the data for all the towns that were in the analysis.
And
Why-
that's still a
and-
substantial increase from what they're getting paid.
Yeah,
Well, I guess
and
not
the- Well, not-
substantial.
And the
but
third,
It's a 25% increase. I'm not saying it's right.
Not for
now,
the-
just saying numbers.
why so much less for the, I mean, yeah, I can see bringing it down to the 30 and. But I
I'm
was
not
thinking
sure
what a
an
30 and a
aggregate of
20 is.
This is helpful because
Yeah,
you're
It's all
aggregating
over the
nothing.
place.
right,
to- So I don't think.
the
that that's
averages don't really help
helpful.
much.
Yeah,
I mean, I understand
Personally.
your concern about how the public is going to receive this and you don't want any negative blowback onto the council, but I think. As you mentioned before, if we present this, that we're looking at it in a completely different way, we're looking at it at what our elected officials are in the county. And we're assuming a percentage of that for our council is a fair thing, and the current council will not be getting this, it is a future council.
Yeah.
I personally would not want to cut these numbers down from what I was suggesting before. And I think that having the CPI come into effect as soon as this is approved, so it's still catching up. So when it actually gets paid, it's at the rate that it should be, is what's necessary to diversify our council, to recognize the work that they're doing, to recognize the amount of additional work that's being involved right now. And yes, different mayors will do different amounts and different councils do different amounts. For instance, if we're saying that it's half of the pay of the Board of Supervisors, and if Melanie wants to spend more time, then she's, being compensated less, but that's up to her.
Mhm.
But at least it's recognizing that the complicated city that we have and the cost of living that we have here, these are the numbers that I think personally, I feel comfortable putting forward. It's just me, but I feel pretty strongly about
So where would you go? What's your numbers?
the numbers that I've given, 62.5 and
37,200.
37.5.
I got-
Numbers are only important from the city budget perspective. What we're saying is we think it should be based on the city commissioner's salary, whatever it is at that time.
county.
Or county
Yeah.
commissioner's salary.
Yeah.
Quick question, if,
Oh, you are? Well, that
Maybe
would
we
be
aren't.
different.
Maybe we aren't.
That would be a different approach.
Well, I mean, that's where we're
Drafted
deriving
wise.
these numbers.
I
right
think
now.
I think the better thing would be to
Give
get
a
a more
number.
Just a
solid number
solid
now,
number.
yeah,
Okay.
at this.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
instead of saying 50%.
Let everybody say what.
Can I just ask one question? I can't remember how we came up with the counselor percentage, the 30%. In relation to the mayor being at 50%.
The average of what city
Time.
councilors' time they think they put in a week.
Okay, that was based on
Yeah.
time. Okay,
Yeah, 50-30 was sort of the,
Well,
okay.
Well, I think what, just to clarify here, Stephen, is, I think what we're saying is, in the resolution, we would establish a number based upon what's being suggested here, the 50% of the county commissioners for the mayor and 30% of the current rate for the, and then that would be, that would be the
Starting
number,
point.
that would be the starting point.
Yeah, we're not tying it specifically in the future to what the county commissioners are.
No, what we're tying
Same
it to would be the
flat
CPI.
Right,
be the,
exactly. So
yeah.
we're coming up
We're
with these
starting the
numbers
baseline.
at this moment in
baseline,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if council decides to shoot this down, does it come back to us? Or does it, that's it? Just curious, because if we're gonna come up with this great idea, because we really do believe this. And council's like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. We're not gonna increase our wages by 50% or 100% or 200%, 300%. I'm not saying that should be in consideration, but it's just a genuine question.
Well, or can we? Is it okay to run this by like Melanie just as a,
I don't think that would be a good idea.
Okay.
Independent
yeah.
advisory committee, so the
Yeah.
council choice, council would have. some
Ultimately,
choices, would
yeah.
be to say. Thank you very much for the recommendation, we're going to do X, and I think. I think increasing the amount would be more problematic, lowering the amount, they probably would do on their own, they could say. If you did something wild and beyond their resolution, they might say it needs to go back. I mean, the code says we're supposed to do this every 5 years, which is this year. And we're already not gonna do it until next year, so. It would probably be our least favorite result would be to have to reconvene the committee.
Okay.
I think council would there's so much on the plate next year, council would really, and I think as we get more towards the election, they'd be less inclined to, I think they would like to get this done in March.
The only reason I bring it up is because I agree with this number wholeheartedly, but I also want to get something that is going to get passed by this council. And I'm not saying that's what we should be, and we don't know that. I agree wholeheartedly. But a 200% increase or 300% increase or whatever the numbers look like, that's maybe the destination, but sometimes we just have to get to the next stop. And that's what I said earlier. I'm not saying I disagree because I really believe those numbers are right. But if council is just going to shoot that down, then this is a lot of work just to have them come back to us to do a lot more work. And maybe that's okay. That's okay. I'm not saying that's wrong because we're here for volunteering our time for a good cause and for a good reason, but that might be in the back of our heads.
It sounds like once they receive our recommendation, they could say,
Reduce it.
well, let's take 10% off that,
Yeah.
and that's what they would do.
Sure.
But I think that's
Yeah.
for them to determine that, and we have our job, and
I agree.
What is
And,
40?
you know, I agree with you that the average number isn't really very.
Who's going to
very
put
helpful,
out the
but a
proposal
median number
for
would
this
be
raise?
more
Is it
helpful.
us? Are we
And the
gonna
median
draft up
median
something
number is
at work,
roughly
or-
55, 65.
So we're in that
Pretty
range,
close to
we're in that
But-
range.
I think, and again, I think that's something that we could say
I agree
in
with-
defense of the decision.
Yeah.
Is that we're
But
kind of the
look,
median.
I agree with
Okay.
you. So,
median-
perception
Okay.
That
Oh,
can
sure.
create-
We're
But to
putting 6
agree
conversations
that-
here. Go ahead. And then we're gonna need to get this wrapped up here.
About the perception it creates of having some, 200% raise. It sounds wild to the public. And it can be, in the
It's a
media.
good point.
like, oh,
Median, yeah.
They're gonna.
Based on
They're gonna say.
cities that we
it's
could-
wild
Getting
increase.
ahead of ourselves, but you could decide at the end of this process to say, as a committee. We'd like to write a letter to the editor, a source, or to say, we want to get our reasons out there outside of the lawyers explaining and probably Judy going to the work session, but we'd actually like to make a public statement of some sort of what we did and why.
I volunteer to write that for you.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
we can do
yeah,
that.
and if you have issues with the Public Meetings Act while you're still, you can't exchange via email unless it's a small group of you, but once you're done with your work, then that's good. So we could talk about that at the
Later.
last meeting, but
Yeah.
that's something that committee sometimes want.
I should volunteer that I'm on the editorial advisory board for the bulletin, so just saying it out there.
Well, my point was that, I think the reflection is people are gonna focus on what's happening now. Whereas going back to that statement, we're trying to forecast and get people to become candidates. So we're talking about the future people, not the people who are now. And I think the public is going to focus on, it's this council who wants,
Yeah.
an increase.
And that's something
Yeah.
we'll have to be
Yeah.
aware of, no matter how
Say
we
it or-
go after. Yeah,
or-
yeah.
This is for the future.
This is for the future.
Yeah.
You said something earlier that really stuck with me in relation to that. That's the council's job, right? Our job is to come up with our philosophy of where we're going and let the council determine if the public that they represent the public, right? So that's their jobs. Our job is just to come up with a philosophy. I don't disagree with what you're saying, by the way. I'm just saying.
It does not matter what decision happens. Read on social media.
Someone's gonna troll it.
That
Let me
just-
get me started.
Amen
Well,
to that. Amen to
So
that.
do we want to, okay, do we want to put out there for a vote, a proposal for the resolution? Or do we want to wait and tie it all together? I mean, we basically have the stipend. And it's not the stipend versus the benefit part, but the stipend plus. And so do we want to consider those in the same sort of, conversation, or do we want to gear in on the stipend today? And then take on the issue of the benefits at the next meeting?
I'll speak for myself. I think that they're tied, so I would not like to create a resolution right now, but that's my opinion.
I agree with that.
We know the numbers though. We know the numbers.
I know, but we have 1 minute left.
We could get consensus today about our recommendation for the
Stipend?
monthly stipend portion and then reserve the right to update that once we have.
Sure.
How does that work? Is
Yeah,
every,
Can I clarify something?
Yes.
Did we, so in the code, are we going to do a specific tie to the county commissioner's salary? Or did we decide we did not want to
We're
do
gonna
that?
do numbers.
That we're setting the baseline, okay.
That would be in our justification, I
Well,
guess.
I just wanted to ask you a question about the median numbers, because on this, the 50th percentile, which is the median, is 29,000.
Right, about 30,000.
Yeah, 30,000. So we're talking about aligning with the median. If we're aligning with the median, we're saying 30,000 for the mayor.
I don't think we're talking about that.
That, yeah, so where are we coming up with the other median number that was 57,000?
So we were just
I just
having,
eyeballed it.
so the problem, so you've got it, we have to figure out what we're gonna, if we were gonna go that route, which I think we were having a sidebar is. It's not helpful to use all these numbers, because some of it's nonsensical and
Right.
it's zero instances. So, one suggestion would be to focus in on the cities that have similar population and do some sort of look there as part of our justification. But then to say, okay, we looked at that and then we looked at what the county commissioners are making. It's a little bit more on that 50% versus this. But for our area and for what our peer elected officials are making, we're electing to align a few more dollars and have it be aligned with their peer elected officials versus someone in Russia.
Yeah,
I thought of that this morning and looked at these numbers and came up with averages based on population size. So. Average cities in this list of our population. That is, what is it, 41,000. That's included, but that includes the ones that don't pay anything.
We should remove those.
Right, so if I remove that and said, these are the ones who actually pay their mayors, it goes up to 69,000.
that's an average.
Yep.
That's an average.
What cities did
That
you?
would
average
average
among
Hillsborough and Beaverton.
And how much was that number again? Sorry.
69.
69. And we're at 67.
The median's
I
about.
do.
Brooke, could you scroll back up to
Median,
the
like, very
recommendation
wildly.
that's on the top?
If,
And the counselors traditionally get paid so much less than.
if we're going to have some loose tie to the market. I think having just three cities that we're comparing against is an awfully small number. Ought to really try to get some others in there, even if it means,
Going out.
reaching into. I know we wanted to stay with Oregon, but reaching into Washington maybe. I mean, three data points is really,
Especially when one of them's $92,000.
yeah.
But what is relevancy does Washington have for Oregon though, I guess continues to be the question.
Yeah, I
Idaho.
agree.
Idaho beat-
Oh, no.
You know,
No,
Well, the reason why I.
I've got ties to
suggested
Idaho, but
that
no.
30 and 10 against the county commission was that it's a much smaller number. But it's still, I mean, especially if we add health insurance, we're still talking about, that would be $30,000 a year for being a county, for being a city councilor. And $55,000 a year for being the mayor. So those are still big numbers if you add the health insurance. And again, looking at the equity lens of somebody's got to give up a second job, maybe that pays minimum wage, that would certainly compensate them for that. So a smaller number still works from an equity lens. And
But that's not
Well-
gonna work for the attorney who has to give up her job.
Okay.
And I think if we're offering a number that we think is realistic, and it's up to the council if they feel it's not politically palatable, they can take it down from there.
Yeah.
If we come in at a very low point and they think, geez,
They're not
that's,
gonna go up from.
they're not gonna go up.
They're not
That's-
gonna go up if we
Yeah,
reckon-
so,
and
right.
look at that number
No.
from an equity point of view. Those are terrific numbers from the point of view of improving access to public
All
office for
sorts of people.
disadvantaged
yes,
people.
exactly.
Those-
Well, and
those are real
I think I think what I'm hearing is a level of consensus of the approach to the increase in the stipend. I think we're not at a final number yet, and I think that probably maybe what I'm hearing from folks is that it's because it's tied, there may be a tie to the benefits.
We had a request for 40-20 as well, so maybe
40, yeah.
we can.
Show us options.
40-20
we can
is,
give
show
the
us, yeah,
benefits
yeah.
Options with the 50-30, 40-20, 30-10. And
With
kind
that
of
125.
with, yeah.
Thank
with-
you.
with-
Oh, I think that's a
with
great
the
idea.
125 along with benefits, like what's the
Yes.
total?
Right,
package
yeah, using that
with all the
125 is
benefits,
the, that's
so that
because
you
that's
all
really,
have
Yeah.
something
And the other
to
thing-
Yeah.
compare Together.
yeah, I think that's a great approach.
I think with that data, I think we could make a quick decision. I mean, I think then we can move on to the health insurance question
Yeah, so,
and get everything done the next time.
so are those the right 50-30, 40-20 and 30-10?
Do it again
50-30,
50-30, 40-20.
30.
and 30-10.
30-10.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
Gives us a
great.
great
those are
range.
the options. That's
Okay.
that's a good solid, yeah, range. I agree, Kelly, yeah.
So that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And
Okay.
and in terms of the benefits, there's like 3 different levels there. You're gonna kind of under the different benefit assumptions,
You want
look
to
at the
scroll up?
totals. You know,
I can
there's
scroll up to those.
the family, yeah,
Yeah.
there's family employee only.
Yeah, we're gonna, there will have to be a, yeah, I think,
What's on line 26 and 27? What are those acronyms? HRA.
Health
Yeah, those are
reimbursement account.
Health retirement.
Mint.
account.
Yeah, and it's.
Oh,
and
I
it's
see.
addressed by HR in better detail
yeah,
at next
Okay.
meeting.
It's a tax protected health
Yeah.
savings account where you.
yeah,
And all
Oh,
that
I see.
info that you'll receive will go
savings
into, will show the value of a potential benefit to the counselor annually.
Got it. Okay.
And the cost to the city annually. So you'll have those figures.
and I think too, there will be the issue, one of the issues that we'll have to consider with all of this is if there's an opt-out, how does that, how would that potentially impact the overall compensation, if, you know,
Which I think goes to the percentage paid.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I've got a strong lesson in minimum wage and wage and not using those words. And then to me, that translates to, we offer them the ability to buy into the city plan, health plan, as opposed to paying any portion of it.
Right.
Is like an employee,
That may well be.
which may help politically how that goes down, that we're opening the door for you, but you have to use a portion of your stipend to buy it, which also speaks to the flexibility idea. That way,
Yeah.
then
And so,
if
yeah,
it's, you have, the door is open for you to buy it, but you're at 100%.
So you're saying 100%, they pay 100% of the premium.
As a, yes,
The
I'm
employees.
throwing that out as an idea
yeah,
that
so that could, I mean, if, yeah.
separating them out as employees, that they're not employees. And
Right,
so
right.
you have access to the plan, but you have to buy into it. That gives the flexibility of, that's why what I really need to be able to do this is to buy health insurance, or maybe what I really need to do this is to be able to afford childcare. And we've set it at a salary that they can afford childcare for when they're gone. You know what I mean? I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm making sense.
Yeah, no, we hadn't
Yeah.
talked
I
to
know-
Pacific Source about it, it was more than the same, but we can look at
Yeah.
the numbers of what that.
And I'm
looks like.
taking that,
Potentially how that could, yeah.
right, I'm
We have to
taking
check
that
the
completely
Pacific
from this
Source.
column of the
Yeah.
form
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
seeing the differences
Yeah.
in how they pay in.
So just so
Yeah.
I'm clear, you're saying that that plan would be, the city pays, so the councilors and mayor have the option to purchase the health insurance plan that
Correct.
the city has for its employees, but the city will pay no portion.
That's what she
I'm
said.
offering it just as a starting point.
Right.
That's,
To look at
that,
other options. though.
well, but that's where,
I
that's
think
part
where the
of,
percentage, where the I think what I
Yes.
hear you saying,
Talk
and
about
correct
the
me if I'm
higher
wrong,
percentage
the higher percentage,
that-
that's the impetus to making a decision about, is it a 50-30, a 40-20, a
Right,
30-10?
For a bigger number.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
what I'm really trying to get on the table is that it's not an either or. I mean, the city employees aren't paid at 100%, they're
Right,
paid only at
right,
90% and nothing for their, or I don't know, for their families, but
right.
there's a range there too.
Right.
Are we saying, yes,
Okay.
you can have access to the health insurance, but you have to pay
Yeah.
for it, you can have access and we'll give you 50%. There's a range
Yeah.
within that is
Yeah,
what I'm
because
trying
if
to.
you
Yeah.
go- if you start to go to, if you start to go to $62,000 plus $18,000, you're starting to around about a pretty big number.
Right,
And HR has told us, if a city employee opts out because their spouse out, we don't get paid, and there is no mechanism for giving people money. Your
Right.
idea is an
Well, that's
interesting
right.
one that kind of gets around that to make it more fair amongst counselors who need insurance and who don't.
and who don't.
Yeah, I hadn't thought, because we were gonna say no opt, you're either
Well,
in or out, and there's no such
and a
thing as
counselor-
getting paid, but that kind of solves.
Most of the counselors have full-time jobs, so they probably already have health insurance.
Well, I took
Not
that,
necessarily, yeah,
it's Beaverton that's doing that,
yeah,
but they're also doing the 92,000.
yeah. But they can.
They can do that.
Well, that's interesting.
All right.
That's an interesting perspective.
So,
Yeah.
Give them a bigger.
Yeah.
Let them do whatever they want to.
All right, so do you think you have,
Yeah.
your guys are in the,
Yep.
enough for the, put it all together for the next.
When's the next meeting?
We did some good work
Let's
here
see.
today.
Our next meeting is
It will be in January.
January, yeah.
I didn't bombard you with the doodle poll today.
Thank you.
You're welcome, but I will next week. And so if you could answer before,
You didn't zero in on a date? Oh, okay.
I have a few options.
Oh, okay,
and I didn't
okay,
Send you that poll
okay.
because I knew we were meeting today. I got overwhelmed.
You get this, you get my head,
Are you
yeah.
hopeful that that'll be our last meeting?
Yeah, so next week I'll send out a meeting.
Yeah,
poll.
I
Please
think we made a
respond.
lot of progress today.
Kind of warming up.
And we'll get it scheduled
I think we did
by the end of the month. hopefully.
I think you're right, yeah, absolutely, so.
Great discussion.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Okay,
Madam Chairman?
adjourn.
Have a great weekend,
I
everybody.
don't have a gavel, where's my gavel?
It's a pleasure to meet you. Like a coach. No.
You're supposed to have a gavel, right?
I guess.
Especially if you inside.
Okay,
I both.
see, this is what happens when you get all of these
Be nice.
smart people with
29.
Yeah,
A lot of years.
you-
I got a lot